It's not a census year, but the U.S. Census Bureau is conducting a test in preparation for the 2030 census. So that letter you got in the mail, it's not a scam. But do you have to participate? Let's verify. When you go through your mail, you may soon see a letter like this, asking you to participate in the 2026 census test. Huntsville was one of just 2 cities in the country selected to participate. And if you read that letter, you may notice this line that says you are required by law to complete this survey. But are you really? Can something as simple as throwing this letter away with your junk mail get you prison time? We verify. Our sources are the Better Business Bureau and the U.S. Code. According to the Better Business Bureau, households that do not respond may first receive reminder letters. If they still don't receive a response, census workers may come to collect your answers in person, or the Census Bureau may use recent government records and other data to fill in information for you. But if all of that doesn't work, what is the punishment for not completing the census test? According to Title 13 of the U.S. Code, refusing to respond or willfully neglecting to answer can result in a fine of up to $100. Deliberately giving false answers, however, can land you a fine of up to $500. And giving false information with the intent to cause inaccurate documentation of the population can carry a fine of up to $1,000 and up to 1 year in prison. But while this is considered a misdemeanor, actual prosecution is extremely rare. So if you get this letter, how do you know if it's real? According to the Better Business Bureau, the letter will direct you to an official .gov website. It will include a census ID, not a payment request. It will not ask for bank or financial information, and it references participation under federal law. The bottom line is, if you receive a legitimate census test letter, the best course of action is to fill it out sooner rather than later, unless you want a government official to come knocking on your door. If you have something you want us to verify, text us at 256-382-2692.
A controversial multi-million-dollar project in Muscle Shoals is sparking a big debate about who really holds the power in city government. Last week, the city council voted to keep moving forward with the new Sportsplex project, even after Mayor Billy Hudson vetoed the plan over cost concerns. The move left a lot of people asking questions about how that's even possible. So why does it seem like the city council has more power than the mayor in Muscle Shoals? We verify. Drama is stirring in Muscle Shoals over a major city decision that's putting local government power in the spotlight. The city council recently voted to resume progress on a $90 million multi-use sports complex, overriding the mayor's decision to pause the project. So, how does the power balance work between the mayor and the city council? Let's verify. Our sources are the Alabama Code and the Alabama League of Municipalities. Here's what we found. In Alabama, there are 2 forms of city government. The first is the less common one, the council-manager system. Under this system, the council holds legislative power, but instead of a strong mayor, they appoint a professional city manager to handle day-to-day administration. The second and more common form is the mayor-council system. Under this system, the city council holds legislative power, which gives them the authority to set policy, control the budget, and pass ordinances. Meanwhile, the mayor holds executive power. Think of the role like a CEO. They oversee day-to-day operations, manage employees, and execute contracts. With both sides handling separate responsibilities, it should guarantee a balance of power, right? So why does it seem like the council in Muscle Shoals has more authority than the mayor? Well, that balance of power actually shifts depending on the size of the city. In cities with fewer than 12,000 residents, the mayor sits with the council, presides over meetings, and can vote on ordinances, but they do not have the power to veto. But in larger cities, the balance shifts. The mayor takes on a separate executive role and gains the power to veto council decisions, but that power isn't final. The city council can still override a veto with a 2/3 vote, meaning both sides share control over big decisions. This is exactly what we saw play out with the proposed Sportsplex. Muscle Shoals sits in this category with a population of around 17,000 residents, so while Mayor Hudson had the authority to pump the brakes on the Sportsplex, the council used their power to override that decision. So the bottom line is, when the 2 sides clash, it's the size of the city that determines who has the final say.
Imagine this, you're walking down the sidewalk, looking at your phone, and suddenly a bike zooms past you. People say it happens in Huntsville all the time, but is it even legal to ride a bike on the sidewalk? We verify. Every day, cyclists hit the sidewalk instead of the street. It feels safer, smarter, and for some, it just feels right. But for someone trying to take a walk, it feels the complete opposite. So, is it legal to ride a bike on the sidewalk in Huntsville? Let's verify. Our sources tonight are the City of Huntsville's codes and ordinances, Alabama state law, and bikehuntsville.com. Most people assume that getting off the road and onto the sidewalks is the responsible move, but the law actually sees it very differently. That's because in Alabama, bicycles are classified as vehicles, and just like you wouldn't drive your car down the sidewalk, cyclists aren't allowed there either. Here in Huntsville specifically, the city goes even further with the local ordinance that says, quote, bicycles and tricycles shall not be ridden on the sidewalks of this city unless such sidewalk has been designated as a part of a bikeway. So in any case, when you're riding a bike, the law generally requires you to use the bike lane. But what if there's no bike lane available? Alabama law requires cyclists to ride as far to the right of the roadway as safely possible. BikeHuntsville.com also points out that beyond being illegal, sidewalk riding is actually dangerous. Not only is it unsafe for pedestrians, it also puts cyclists at risk. Drivers pulling out of driveways and through intersections aren't expecting fast-moving bikes coming down the sidewalk, and that's where a number of crashes happen. So we can verify that no, it is not legal to ride your bicycle on the sidewalk in Huntsville. Both city rules and Alabama state law require cyclists to ride in the bike lane.
The SEC is widely considered the most dominant athletic conference in college sports. Especially in football, with 16 member schools across the South and beyond, it's home to powerhouse programs like Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and now Texas and Oklahoma. But how does a university become a member of the SEC? Let's verify. Our sources are the 2025-26 SEC Constitution and Bylaws, SEC historical records, and reporting on the conference's most recent expansion. Here's what we found. According to the SEC's Constitution and Bylaws, the SEC doesn't have an open enrollment process. Membership is invitation only. To extend that invitation, at least 3/4 of the current member schools must vote yes. And while the SEC doesn't publish an official checklist to join, the history of its expansions tells the story. Schools that have been accepted bring large media markets, strong athletic programs, and passionate fan bases. We saw exactly how this works when Texas and Oklahoma sought membership back in 2021. Both university presidents formally notified the SEC that they were seeking an invitation. Just 2 days later, all 14 SEC school presidents voted unanimously to extend that offer. But getting voted in is only part of the process. The incoming school also has to get out of its current conference, and that usually means paying an exit fee. Texas and Oklahoma had to negotiate a buyout with the Big 12 before they could officially make the move. That deal wasn't finalized until February of 2023, and it's what allowed both schools to join the SEC in 2024, making them the 15th and 16th members of the conference. So, if your favorite school is dreaming of playing in one of the best conferences in college sports, it's going to take more than talent alone.
You may not have heard of them, but there's bees out there known for chewing through your concrete. They're called mortar bees, also known as mason bees, and around this time of year, they're starting to show up more and more. So, if you find these little guys packed in the cracks and gaps of your home, are they causing serious damage? We verify. Spotting a bee crawling into your home's walls can be alarming, and when you start noticing mortar disappearing from between your bricks, it's easy to assume the worst. So, can mortar bees actually cause significant damage to your home? Let's verify. Our sources are exopest.com, irescuebees.com, and Encyclopedia Britannica. Here's what we found. Mortar bees, also known as mason bees, are small, stocky bees that have a metallic blue or black look to them, and at first glance, they can look a lot like your average honeybee. But even though they're commonly mistaken for honeybees, they function a lot differently. Unlike honeybees, they don't form hives, and they don't have a queen, meaning each bee builds and provides for their own nest. According to experts, since they have no hive or honey to protect, they have no reason to be aggressive. They're also considered some of the most effective pollinators. often even more efficient than honeybees. What also sets them apart is their enlarged rear legs, which they use to physically remove mortar from your brickwork. But here's a common misconception. Mortar bees can't bore into solid wood or concrete. Instead, they use holes and gaps that already exist. If your home has cracks or crumbling mortar, they may clean out or slightly expand those weak areas to build their nests. So, what's the real concern for homeowners? The real concern is what happens over time. When mortar bees remove or loosen mortar from your brickwork, it allows moisture to enter the wall cavity. And if that damage goes unaddressed, it can lead to significant issues. So what can you do to protect your home from these critters? Experts say don't reach for pesticides. Instead, fix the root of the problem by replacing or filling in those damaged areas of your walls. When you do repair it, they recommend that you use a mortar that has a higher cement content. That harder mix makes it too difficult for mortar bees to break down, stopping the problem at its source. So we can verify that no, mortar bees are not a significant structural threat to your home, but they can make existing damage worse if cracks and crumbling mortar are left unrepaired. And as always, if you have something you want us to verify, you can text us at 256-382-2692.
The city of Madison announced they'll begin mosquito spraying Monday. And while the treatment is essential to enjoy the great outdoors in the summertime, do the chemicals they use to reduce the mosquito population affect other bugs? Let's verify. When you step outside on a summer night and see mosquito fogging trucks driving through your neighborhood, the goal seems pretty simple. Cut down on those pesky blood-sucking bugs. But while those sprays target mosquitoes, many people wonder, does mosquito spraying harm other bugs and insects? Let's verify. Our sources are the CDC, the EPA, a National Library of Medicine study on mosquito adulticides, and the City of Madison's Public Works Department. Here's what we found. The City of Madison says it uses an adulticide program with fogging trucks operating in the evening hours to reduce mosquito populations. The CDC says mosquito control professionals often use low-volume sprayers, which create very small droplets that kill flying mosquitoes on contact, while using only small quantities of pesticide. But the EPA says some of the chemicals used in mosquito control can be toxic to bees and fish. That's why label instructions include steps to reduce risks to pollinators. The CDC specifically says these products should not be applied to plants in bloom or to plants that bees, butterflies, and other pollinators visit, as it could cause them harm. Timing also matters. The National Library of Medicine study found that most research shows minimal impacts on honeybees when mosquito spraying is done at night when bees are inside their hives. The study also found no significant rise in honeybee deaths from routine mosquito control sprays. Madison's spraying program operates from 7:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m., which is consistent with the times the study recommends. So we can verify that yes, mosquito spraying can harm some other insects if it's improperly applied. But federal agencies and research studies say routine low-volume mosquito spraying, when done according to label directions and during evening hours, is designed to minimize impacts on other bugs, including bees. Spring is here, and so is a pest that has Tennessee officials on high alert. If you've seen warnings about spotted lanternflies popping up on your social media feed, you might be wondering if these bugs are something to worry about. Well, tonight we verify if spotted lanternflies are dangerous. Spotted lanternflies are hatching across Tennessee right now, and the warnings are everywhere. If you've spent any time outside this spring, there's a good chance you've already seen one. But before you panic, are spotted lanternflies dangerous to humans? Let's verify. Our sources are the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Penn State, and BiologyInsights.com. Here's what we found. The spotted lanternfly is an invasive insect native to China, India, and Vietnam. It was first detected in the United States and Pennsylvania in 2014, and it's been spreading ever since. In 2023, it was confirmed in Davidson County, Tennessee, but as of late, it spread to multiple counties across the region, and right now, their eggs are hatching. State officials are sounding the alarm, urging residents to report every sighting. Warnings are also circulating on social media, and experts are calling it one of the most significant invasive pest threats in recent memory. So with all that being said, should you be worried about your own safety? Here's what the experts say. Spotted lanternflies don't bite, they don't sting, and they don't transmit any diseases to humans or animals. So if you come into contact with one, you are in no physical danger, but that doesn't mean you should leave them alone. While they pose no threat to people, spotted lanternflies are a serious threat to plants. The insect feeds by piercing plant stems and sucking out sap, weakening the plant and leaving it more vulnerable to disease and other pests. According to the Penn State Extension, more than 70 plant species are at risk, some of which include grapevines, maple trees, birch willow, and other trees. They also leave behind a sticky substance called honeydew that coats surfaces and promotes the growth of sooty mold, causing even more damage over time. State officials are asking you to report any sightings to the Tennessee Department of Agriculture through the state's online pest reporting system. They say if you spot an egg mass, scrape it into a container of soapy water or hand sanitizer and make sure the eggs are crushed. Simply scraping them to the ground may not stop them from hatching. So we can verify that no, spotted lanternflies are not dangerous to humans, but state officials say they are a growing threat to Tennessee's plants, crops, and ecosystems. So while this bug won't bug you, it could do a number on your backyard.
Alabama's temporary grocery sales tax holiday begins today, eliminating the 2% state tax on groceries. But it's not forever. The holiday only runs through June 30th, but some, including the bill's sponsor, think the suspension should be permanent. But how does Alabama's grocery tax stack up against the rest of the United States? We verify.
Representative James Lomax, the sponsor of the grocery sales tax holiday bill, told Fox 54 yesterday that he looks forward to the day where there are no taxes on groceries in Alabama. Alabama Rise echoed that sentiment, saying 2 months is a good start toward forever. But how does Alabama's grocery tax stack up against the rest of the country? We verify. Our sources are the AARP and LegalClarity.org. According to AARP, only 8 states in the U.S. tax groceries: Hawaii, Idaho, Utah, South Dakota, Missouri, Tennessee, Mississippi, and you guessed it, Alabama. So which state has the highest grocery tax? It's actually Idaho. Idaho taxes groceries at its normal sales tax rate of 6%, but they do offer a break in the form of a tax credit. Residents can claim a grocery credit of up to $155 per person on their state tax return. Mississippi is close behind at 5%, just recently reducing the tax from 7% last July. Hawaii sales tax sits between 4 and 4.5%, depending on the county. South Dakota is 4.2%. Tennessee is 4%. Utah comes in at 3%. And then there's Alabama with a 2% grocery tax. Missouri has the lowest rate at just 1.225%. But remember, 42 states don't have a grocery tax at all. Local jurisdictions may also add their own sales tax on top of the state rate. For example, Huntsville enforces a 4.5% sales tax, while Madison County doesn't enforce one at all. It really all comes down to your zip code. So we can verify that Alabama is one of only a few states in the country that still has a grocery tax. But of those, Alabama has one of the lowest rates at 2%.
If you have something you want us to verify, text us at 256-382-2692.
The national average price of a gallon of gas is finally dropping after months of gradual increases. And just today, President Trump proposed suspending the federal gas tax. But 18.4 cents may not feel like much when you're paying double what you're used to. So is this the most expensive gas has ever been in Alabama? We verify. Our sources are the U.S. Energy Information Administration and AAA. Here's what we found. According to AAA, the average price for a gallon of regular unleaded in Alabama today is just over $4. That's about 50 cents less than the national average. But let's go back in time. According to the EIA, gas prices stayed mostly steady from the 1980s until the early 2000s when the Afghanistan war began in response to the 9/11 attacks. Prices rose throughout the early 2000s, peaking in June 2008 at $3.37 per gallon. Prices then went into free fall, and by December that same year, prices were down to just over $1 per gallon as a result of the Great Recession when demand for gas and oil reduced drastically. Prices went back up before peaking again in 2011 at $3.17, rising and falling for the next several years. Prices plummeted again in 2015, dropping to just over $1 due to low crude oil prices, oversupply, and a strong U.S. dollar. Prices steadily rose over the next few years, falling briefly in 2019 before a sharp decline in 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since that last drop, prices have only really gone up, dropping by small increments for short bursts of time before going back up. That increase came to a head in the summer of 2022, when gas prices exceeded $4 per gallon, nearing $6 in some areas, directly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, igniting a global oil shock. Prices eventually evened out, holding between $2.50 and $3 per gallon. Which brings us to today. As we said at the beginning, the average cost of a gallon of gas in Alabama today is just over $4. While this is a notable increase from what has been the norm over the last few years, we have not yet broken the record set in June 2022 when the average gas price in Alabama was $4.63. So, we can verify that no, this is not the most expensive gas has ever been, and experts say some relief is on the way.
A Good Samaritan recently stepped in to stop a hit-and-run suspect until police arrived. You can see that story on our website. The police can't be everywhere at once, so it raises a real question for a lot of people. What are you actually allowed to do in a situation like that? So tonight we're verifying what the law says about citizens' arrest in Alabama.
A crime can happen anytime, anywhere, and without warning. And in those moments, there's not always time to wait. That's exactly what happened in a recent Huntsville case when a Good Samaritan stopped a hit-and-run suspect until authorities arrived. While some see that as heroic, others highlight a legal gray area that most people don't fully understand. And one wrong move during a citizen's arrest could turn you from hero to defendant. So, what exactly are the rules for a citizen's arrest in Alabama? We verify. Our source tonight is Alabama Code Section 1510.7. Here's what we found. Alabama law does allow citizens' arrests, but only under 3 specific conditions. First, if the offense is committed directly in your presence. Second, if a felony has been committed by the person you're arresting, even if you didn't witness it. And third, if a felony has been committed and you have reasonable cause to believe the person you are arresting is responsible. The law also states that felony arrests can be made any day at any time, but it requires you to tell the person why they're being arrested. The only exception is if they're caught in the act or if you're already in active pursuit. Once you make the arrest, you must hand that person over to law enforcement or a judge without unnecessary delay. Now, here's where it gets serious. The risks of making an unlawful citizen's arrest are significant. If you arrest the wrong person or try to detain someone for what turns out to be a misdemeanor rather than a felony, you could face a civil lawsuit for false imprisonment. And depending on how the situation is handled, that can also lead to criminal charges, including assault or unlawful restraint. And if someone dies during your citizen's arrest, you could be charged with manslaughter or even murder. Unlike police officers, private citizens have no qualified immunity. Every decision you make during that arrest can and will be used against you in court. So anyone who attempts a citizen's arrest does so at their own risk. In the Good Samaritan's case we mentioned earlier, their actions appear to fall within what the law allows. The offense was committed in their presence, and they held the suspect only until police arrived. But experts warn that every situation is different, and what works in one case may not be protected in another. The safest course of action in almost every situation is to call 911, observe, and report.
If you have something you want us to verify, text us at 256-382-2692.
You see the headlines often. Someone commits a crime and a judge hands down a sentence with a handful of years. Then some time passes and that person is back home in a year or two. It feels wrong and numbers don't add up. So what actually happened? Let's verify. When someone's convicted of a crime, most people picture one straight stretch of time behind bars. But that's not always the case, and that's where split sentencing comes into play. A judge might say 15 years, but the person is home in 18 months. So when someone's convicted of a crime, how does split sentencing work? Let's verify. Our source tonight is the Alabama Code. Here's what we found. In Alabama, judges have the option to use what's called a split sentence. That means a judge can impose a full sentence, but then order the defendant to only serve a portion of that time behind bars, with the rest served on supervised probation. But how that works depends on the class of felony and the length of the sentence. For more serious felonies like Class A or Class B, the judge can choose to split the sentence or have them serve their full term in prison. If the sentence is 15 years or less, the judge can order up to 3 years of confinement before probation begins. If the sentence falls between 15 and 20 years, that confinement portion runs 3 to 5 years. And for sentences between 20 and 30 years, the defendant must serve at least 10 years behind bars, no exceptions. One important thing to note is that split sentencing is not an option for anyone convicted of a sex offense involving a child. Those cases are excluded from this law entirely. For less serious felonies like Class C or Class D, the law actually requires a split in most cases. Confinement is capped at 2 years, with up to 3 years of probation to follow. But that isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. If that person violates the terms of their probation, a judge can send them back to serve the remainder of that original sentence in prison. The goal of split sentencing is to balance punishment with rehabilitation, giving offenders consequences while also giving them a path to reintegrate into the community. Railroad crossings. You pass through them all the time, but you may have noticed that some have gates, while others just have a sign. At some spots, you can't even see a train coming until you're crossing the tracks. With thousands of crashes at rail crossings reported each year, safety is a serious concern. So tonight, we're verifying why only some railroad crossings have gates. Most of us assume that every railroad crossing comes equipped with gates that come down when a train is approaching. But if you've driven around Alabama much, you know that's not always the case. Some crossings have gates and flashing lights, and others just have a sign. So why do only some railroad crossings have gates? Let's verify. Our sources are the Alabama Department of Transportation, the Federal Railroad Administration, and Cornell Law School's Legal Information Institute. Here's what we found. In Alabama, there's no law that requires every railroad crossing to have a gate. The minimum requirement for a public crossing is a crossbuck sign. So what determines whether a crossing gets gates or flashing lights? Well, according to the Federal Railroad Administration, it's on a case-by-case basis. ALDOT's Rail Programs Group works with the Federal Railroad Administration and the railroad company to evaluate each individual crossing. They look at factors like train speed, traffic volume, sight distance, accident history, and whether school buses or trucks with hazardous materials use that road. If they determine a crossing is high risk enough, they can require upgrades, like flashing lights or gates. Once those devices are in place, federal law requires the railroad company to inspect, test, maintain, and provide an alternate warning method like a flagman if those devices ever malfunction. If you believe a crossing in your neighborhood needs better warning devices, you don't have to wait and hope someone else speaks up. You can contact ALDOT's Rail Programs Group and request a safety review or file a concern with the Federal Railroad Administration through their website. Those reports get reviewed, and they can factor into whether a crossing gets flagged for an upgrade. So we can verify that each railroad crossing is evaluated individually and only gets a gate or flashing lights if it's determined to be a high-risk crossing.
Prop money is used in movies and TV shows all the time, but now that fake money is circulating through businesses across the Tennessee Valley. So if you end up with one of these fake bills, is it against the law to just own it? We verify.
Fake money is circulating in North Alabama, and it looks real enough to fool people. The Coleman County Sheriff's Office recently put out a warning after replica bills were used at several businesses throughout the county. The bills carry phrases like "for motion picture purposes" and "prop we trust," but at first glance, they look just like the real thing. And it's not just happening in Coleman. A person in Huntsville recently found themselves on the wrong end of a transaction, accepting what they thought was legitimate cash, only to later discover the bills were prop money. So if one of these movie prop bills finds its way into your hands, is it against the law just to have it? Let's verify. Our source tonight is the Counterfeit Detection Act of 1992 and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. Here's what we found. Under federal law, owning movie prop money is legal, as long as you don't intend to pass it off as real. But the law has very specific rules about what it has to look like. Bills must be printed on one side only. They must be a different size, and they have to be clearly marked with language like "not legal tender" or "for motion picture use only." Now, you might be thinking I've seen fake bills with print on both sides. Well, sometimes companies try to push that line. They argue that the small "not legal tender" label keeps them legal, and that gray area is exactly why these bills keep ending up in circulation. In some cases, whether you know it or not, you could be arrested for using movie prop money. So how can you protect yourself from accepting a fake bill? First, look for the markings, phrases like "for motion picture use only." not legal tender, or in prop we trust are signs the bill is fake. Then look for color shifting ink. Real bills will turn green to copper or vice versa, depending on which way you look at it. Next, look for raised printing. You should feel distinct ridges in real bills. Finally, check the size. Prop bills are required to be noticeably smaller or larger than a real bill. But if you still feel skeptical, you can visit your local bank and ask them to check for you. So we can verify that no, it's not against the law to own movie prop money as long as you don't intend to pass it off as real currency.
If you have something you want us to verify, text us at 256-382-2692.